A single gunshot from a racist cop dropped 15-year-old deaf teen Jalen Carter to the pavement. Seconds later, his mother, CIA operative Alexis Carter, was already moving with a team of agents storming the Ridgewood police station to rip the truth from behind their locked doors. But as the walls closed in, could she bring down a system built to protect its own? Like this story, share it with others and leave your thoughts below. Now let's dive into how it all unfolded. I remember that afternoon as if the heat had welded it into the streets of Ridgewood. Inside the public library, the air was still and faintly laced with the scent of old paper. In the far corner, Jalen Carter, 15, slim, a hearing aid tucked neatly behind his ear, was hunched over a sketchbook. His pencil moved with quiet precision, bringing to life a superhero who looked a lot like him, braver, soaring above the skyline, the hearing device gleaming like a medal of honor. His eyes carried that far-off light the kind kids have when the world in their head feels safer than the one outside. The clock above the front desk ticked toward 5 when Alexis Carter stepped inside. 38, her posture deliberate but her expression softened instantly at the sight of him. She touched his shoulder. Lost in your drawings again, she signed with a small smile. Jalen smirked his fingers, answering, saving the world one page at a time. Be home early, okay? She added aloud, softly but firmly. He nodded, slid the sketchbook into his worn red backpack and hugged her before stepping into the golden light outside. The sun painted long shadows as Jalen walked, his hands moving to the rhythm of a song only he could hear. At the corner of Elm and Hawthorne, a black and white cruiser idled in the shade. Inside, Officer Travis Cohen's eyes locked onto him. That's him, Cohen muttered. You sure? His partner asked, shifting in his seat. Cohen's fingers tightened on the grip of his pistol. Matches the description. Black male, red backpack, acting strange. Acting strange? The partner frowned. He's just walking. Watch his hands. Cohen snapped. Gang signs. You'll see. Jalen turned the corner, unaware of the weight of those eyes on his back. He was thinking about what his hero's city should look like when Cohen's door swung open. The sound of boots hitting pavement. A voice, sharp commanding, cut through the air. Hey! Stop right there! Jalen kept walking, his mind still wrapped around his drawing, the words unregistered. I said stop! Cohen barked now in a sprint. Then it happened. The crack of the gunshot shattered the heavy summer air so loud it felt like the whole street flinched. Jalen's body jerked violently, his knees buckling before he crumpled to the concrete. The red backpack slid off his shoulder, the sketchbook spilling out and opening to a page where his superhero smiled mid-flight. The wind caught the edge of the paper, flipping it gently as a dark stain spread across his shirt. Across the street, Maya Brooks froze. 17. A friend from school. Her scream cut through the shock. Jalen. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, hitting record. The camera captured every detail, the heat shimmering off the pavement. Jalen's chest rising shallowly, blood crawling into the cracks. Cohen, standing over him, gun still in hand. What the hell is wrong with you? A man shouted from the crowd forming near the post office. He's deaf! He can't hear you. Another woman yelled, stepping forward before being pushed back by Cohen's partner. Cohen's jaw tightened, his voice cold. He was resisting. Resisting what? Drawing, the woman snapped. The tension thickened, voices, overlapping footsteps pounding closer. The distant wail of sirens grew louder, mixing with the metallic smell of gunpowder. Every face in that growing crowd was caught between fear and fury. And in that moment, under the glare of the sun, the flashing light still blocks away the quiet life of Jalen Carter ended, replaced by the first ripples of a storm that was already on its way. The conference room at CIA headquarters in Langley was hushed, the kind of silence that comes when every person knows the stakes are high. Alexis Carter sat at the far end of the table, her eyes scanning classified reports, while a muted projector hummed in the background. Then, it happened. The screen in front of her flickered once, twice, before a red banner sliced across the feed. Large block letters blazed code ivory. Below it, a name that yanked the air from her lungs. Jalen Carter, unverified hostile contact. For a heartbeat, Alexis couldn't move. The hum of the projector turned into a roar in her ears. Her son's name here in this building, tagged as if he were a threat. She pushed back from the table so sharply, her chair skidded across the floor. "I have to go," she told no one in particular, her voice low but absolute. No one in that room dared to stop her. Out in the hallway, Alexis had already pulled her secure satellite phone from her bag. She punched in a number from muscle memory. Mason. She said, her tone clipped and lethal. "I need a plane on standby and a silent team armed and ready. Objective Ridgewood Police Department. We move now." There was a pause on the other end. Mason was a man who'd been with her through missions that never made headlines, but even he knew this was different. "Understood," he replied, his voice tightening. "You'll have it in 15. As she strode toward the operations wing, her mind betrayed her, pulling her back into a memory she wished she could erase. It was 3 years ago, just after Jalen's 13th birthday. A group of men had stood outside their suburban Virginia home, holding crude signs scrawled with the words, "No voice, no rights." They'd found out about Jalen's hearing impairment. The police had done nothing. Not one officer had stepped forward when Alexis demanded charges for harassment. That night, after she tucked Jalen into bed, she sat in the kitchen staring at her hands. Hands that could dismantle an enemy network overseas, but couldn't shield her son from the hatred at her own doorstep. That was the night she made the call, quiet, deliberate, to place Jalen in a special CIA protective registry. Every movement, every outing, every school transfer would be tracked under the innocuous label of low-threat dependent. She knew it wasn't a perfect shield, but it was a wall high enough to slow anyone who meant him harm. And yet, here they were. That wall had been breached. Her jaw tightened as she stepped into the elevator. The woman who'd walked into Langley this morning had been a mother. What walked through its halls now was something else entirely calm, coiled, and prepared to dismantle whatever or whoever had touched her son. By the time she reached the tarmac, the Gulfstream was already humming its cabin prepped for rapid deployment. Mason met her at the base of the stairs, handing her a thin dossier. "Everything we've pulled so far on Ridgewood PD," he said, walking with her up the steps. Chief Mallory, 61, former Marine, spotless on paper, but over 20 misconduct complaints buried in internal reviews. Sergeant Travis Cohen, your shooter match, decorated but with a history of force escalation, especially against minors. There's also a detective named Sharp, tends to lose evidence when it's convenient. Alexis's eyes moved over the photos like a sniper lining up a shot. She marked each face with a pen, the pressure so hard it nearly tore the paper. "They touched my son," she murmured. "Every single name in here is going to answer for it." Mason glanced at her. "Alexis. If this goes loud, it won't," she cut him off. "Not unless they make it loud." As the plane lifted off, she strapped herself into the leather seat, but leaned forward, elbows on knees, scanning the Ridgewood PD floor plan on her tablet. Every hallway, every camera blind spot, every choke point, she memorized them all. She'd breached embassies with tighter security than this. Her fingers paused on one section of the map. The holding cells. If they'd injured Jalen and put him there. She exhaled slowly through her nose, locking that thought away for later. For now, the mission was clear. Get to Ridgewood, extract her son, and make sure no one in that building forgot her face or the cost of targeting him. Through the small oval window, the dark ribbon of the Potomac faded beneath them. The hum of the engines was steady, but Alexis's mind was anything but. Somewhere on the ground, her boy was hurt, and someone was about to learn that the worst possible mistake they could make was mistaking her silence for weakness. By the time Alexis's jet cut through the clouds, the world was already watching. It started with a single upload. 17-year-old Maya Brooks. Jalen's classmate had been shaking so hard she almost dropped her phone, but she'd kept filming. The moment Sergeant Travis Cohen raised his weapon, the moment Jalen's hands were still mid-signed sketchbook under his arm, the moment the shot rang out and he crumpled to the pavement. Within minutes, her video was everywhere, hashtags multiplying captions screaming he was signing. He couldn't even hear the warning. In homes across the city, the footage played on loop. The frame freezing on Cohen's face just before he fired, the flash of the muzzle, the red blooming on Jalen's shirt. But in Ridgewood's press room, Police Chief Derek Winslow stood before a wall of flags and microphones, his jaw set like granite. Cameras clicked as he read from a sheet of paper. At approximately 1600 hours, officers encountered an individual matching the description of an armed robbery suspect. The subject displayed unusual behavior and may have been reaching for a weapon. The officers acted within department protocol. Not one mention of the hearing aids, not one word about the signing. Just a neat little narrative designed to erase the boy in that video. Out on the streets, the reactions split like a fault line. Some repeated the chief's words, saying officers had to make quick decisions. Others, louder, angrier, pointed to Maya's footage, insisting no trained cop could mistake those movements for a threat. The truth wasn't just in the pixels. It was in the way Jalen's face looked confused, then afraid right before the shot. Across town, in the brightly lit chaos of Ridgewood Memorial's trauma wing, Dr. Samuel Bryant was scrubbing in. The gunshot had torn into Jalen's chest, dangerously close to his heart. As nurses prepped the boy for surgery, Samuel glanced at the chart age injury name and froze. "Carter," he murmured. As in, the nurse nodded. Alexis Carter's kid. Samuel's niece, a freshman at Jalen's school, had mentioned him before, quiet, always sketching the kind of kid who'd give you his last pen if you needed it. Now that same boy lay pale and still on the operating table, monitors beeping in uneven rhythm. Samuel tightened his gloves. "Let's keep him alive," he said, his voice steady. "No mistakes." 2 hours later, as the ICU doors whispered shut, Alexis arrived. The security escort was unnecessary. No one in that hospital dared stop her, but they trailed her anyway, sensing the force in her silence. She didn't rush. She walked the corridor like she had all the time in the world, though every step was measured, deliberate. When she reached the glass wall of the ICU, she stopped. On the other side, Jalen lay motionless, a web of tubes and wires draped over him. The steady rise and fall of his chest was the only thing keeping the rage inside her from spilling over. Her reflection in the glass stared back at her eyes, sharp, jaw clenched, shoulders squared. This wasn't grief. This was a vow. She placed her palm flat against the cold surface. "They think they can lie their way out of this," she said quietly, almost to herself. "Let's see how long that lasts." And for the first time since the Code Ivory alert, she let the smallest trace of a smile touch her lips, one without warmth, the kind that promised someone's world was about to come apart. By dawn, Sergeant Travis Cohen's quiet suburban street wasn't quiet anymore. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, their breath fogging in the cold air. They weren't shouting yet, but their presence was enough to make Cohen's pulse race. Hand-painted signs bobbed in the morning light, "Justice for Jalen." "Hands off our kids." Every time a phone camera lifted in his direction, he yanked the curtain closed a little tighter. He could almost feel the weight of their stares pressing through the glass. And deep down, he knew once people learned his name, they wouldn't stop at just standing outside. Across town. Inside the Ridgewood PD's private conference room, Police Chief Derek Winslow leaned against his desk phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, but sharp. "Clive, we've got a problem." Clive Maddox, polished suit, silver hair, perfectly parted, sat in the top-floor office of Fortis Defense, a private contractor that specialized in surveillance technology most people didn't even know existed. His company's AI system had been quietly running inside Ridgewood PD for months, monitoring patterns of risk. And now one of those patterns had put a bullet into a 15-year-old boy. On the other end of the line, Clive's tone was colder than steel. If this story falls apart, Derek, we both go down. And it's not just us. If this project is exposed, every department we're in gets burned. Winslow exhaled, jaw tight. So what do you want me to do? Clive didn't hesitate. Erase it. All of it. Video logs, patrol records, dispatch transcripts, anything that ties Fortis to that trigger pull. If you have to bury it under 10 other stories, do it. If there are witnesses, deal with them. At Ridgewood Memorial, Alexis stood at Jalen's bedside, her fingers brushing lightly over his bandaged arm. When his eyelids flickered open for the briefest moment, she leaned close and signed, "You're safe now." His hand twitched back, sloppy weak, but it was enough to answer. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Then she straightened, scanning the room until her gaze fixed on the corner wall panel, the hospital's network hub. A quick glance at the monitor confirmed it was unsecured. In one fluid motion, she pulled a slim black device from her bag and slipped it behind the unit. The green light blinked twice, then went dark. Within seconds, her encrypted feed linked to Ridgewood PD's internal communications. Every order, every scramble to rewrite the story would flow straight into her hands. But she wasn't the only one listening. Back at Fortis, Clive had already assigned 2 of his best men to set up on the roof across from the hospital. Through high-powered lenses, they could see every window on the ICU floor. One of them tapped his earpiece. Visual on target. "Mother's here." Clive's voice crackled back. "Stay on her. She'll make a move. When she does, I want to know before she takes her next breath." And just like that, the hunt had shifted. Both sides were watching. Both sides were waiting. Only one of them understood the other wasn't prey at all. Alexis had seen enough encrypted data streams to know when something was rotten. But what she'd just uncovered made her jaw tighten until it hurt. The files she'd pulled from the Ridgewood PD network weren't routine logs, they were simulations. Carefully staged, perfectly packaged incidents designed to feed Fortis Defense's new AI surveillance program. And there it was in plain text, buried deep in metadata operation precedent. The shooting of Jalen wasn't just an act of brutality. It was a calculated move to create a legal precedent that would allow the AI to flag, target, and neutralize so-called hostile civilians before any crime was committed. Her son was a test case. Her pulse kicked hard in her throat. "They're turning my child into a data point." Just then, her laptop pinged. An anonymous message flashed onto the screen. No sender, just plain text. "Want the truth? Meet me." 03:45 p.m. Old Freight Yard, east edge of Ridgewood. The cursor blinked twice and the message vanished. Alexis leaned back, thinking, a trap. Almost certainly. But the timing and the phrasing, it wasn't a bluff. Whoever sent that wanted her to know something, and fast. She ran the name through her memory, cross-checking with faces she'd scanned in the data earlier. Ethan Voss, rookie cop. Cohen's partner the night of the shooting. 28 commendations for bravery, no disciplinary record yet. But in the stills she'd seen from the body cam feed, his eyes had darted away when Cohen pulled the trigger. A man carrying more than just orders. A sliver of doubt cut through her fury. If he's reaching out, maybe he's not all in on this. She began pulling together her field kit, concealable sidearm, backup comms jammer, GPS relay. Everything moved with precision, the old habits she'd buried since Jalen's birth snapping back like they'd never left. Then her phone buzzed again. This time it was an image. No text, no sender. Alexis's stomach dropped as her thumb hovered over the screen. She tapped the image. It was Jalen. Asleep in his hospital bed, his face pale against the white pillow. But the photo wasn't from the ICU's observation cameras, it was closer angled from the doorway. Someone had been inside the hospital close enough to reach him. She felt the air in the room shrink. Every instinct screamed at her to storm back to the ICU, tear the place apart, until she found who had been there. But that's exactly what they'd want. Draw her in, distract her while the real play unfolded somewhere else. She forced her breathing to slow, scanned the image again. In the upper left corner, just barely visible, a reflection on the polished metal of the doorframe. A man's shoulder. A patch with the faint outline of the Ridgewood PD badge. They're watching him. Her thoughts split clean in two. One part wanted to stay at Jalen's side, build a fortress around his bed. The other knew that if she didn't go to that meeting, she might lose the only chance to expose who orchestrated this. Her jaw set. She could do both if she planned this perfectly. She patched into her comms and called Mason. Activate secondary guard protocol. 2 men at the hospital, low profile. They report to me only. Mason's voice came back tight. On it. What's the other play? I'm going to the freight yard. Alone. A pause. Alexis, don't argue. If I'm compromised, you pull everyone out. No hesitation. She ended the call before he could answer. From the hallway outside, the muted beeps and murmurs of the hospital faded behind the pounding in her ears. Her steps were quick measured, but her mind was already mapping every route, every exit, every shadow she could use between here and that meeting point. Whoever Ethan Voss was right now, a threat, an ally, or a pawn, she'd find out in less than an hour. But one thing was certain, this was no longer just about her son. This was about a machine built to erase people like him, before they even had a chance to speak. And Alexis Carter had never been one to let predators walk free. The moment Alexis stepped out of the ICU wing, the air in Jalen's room seemed to shift. A man in light blue scrubs strolled down the hall pushing a cart. His ID badge swung from his chest, Nurse Ryan. To anyone passing, he was just another staff member making rounds. But when he reached Jalen's door, there was no pause to check the patient chart. No knock, just a swipe of his badge across the scanner. The green light blinked. Door unlocked. Inside, the steady beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound. Jalen lay still, his arm resting beside the IV line. The nurse closed the door softly behind him. His eyes were locked on the boy, his steps too deliberate. From the cart, he drew a small capped syringe, the kind you didn't see in a hospital kit. Black plunger, no label. He was halfway to the bed when the door swung open again. Mourn Maya's voice caught in her throat. She froze in the doorway, her eyes darting from Jalen's sleeping face to the syringe glinting in the stranger's hand. "What are you?" Her voice cracked into a scream. "Help security now!" The intruder's expression didn't flinch, but his body did. He shoved the syringe back into his pocket, spun toward the opposite exit. In his rush, the cap popped off, and the needle clattered to the floor. From the hallway, footsteps thundered closer. 2 hospital security officers stormed in. "There! Stop him!" Maya shouted, pointing. The man shoved past an orderly, nearly knocking over the IV stand, and disappeared into the emergency stairwell. One guard followed in pursuit, while the other bent to pick up the syringe, holding it gingerly by the barrel. "This isn't ours," the guard muttered, his eyes narrowing. "We're calling this in." Jalen stirred at the commotion, his eyes blinking open. He saw Maya in the doorway, her chest heaving, the fallen syringe now in a security evidence bag. "You're okay," she said quickly, her voice softer now. She stepped closer, kneeling beside his bed. I came by to give you something." From her tote bag, she pulled out a worn sketchbook and set it gently in his lap. Jalen's fingers traced the familiar cover, the one she'd given him before all this started. He opened it, slowly flipping past pages of drawings they'd made together during quieter times. On the very last page, her hand-drawn lines leapt to life, a lone superhero standing in the middle of a hostile crowd, weapons aimed from every direction, yet the hero's eyes were steady, defiant, unbreakable. Jalen's gaze lingered on it. Then he looked up at her, and something in his face shifted. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had been burned down to something sharper. Determination. He raised his hands, signing slowly but firmly. "We have to show them the truth." Maya's throat tightened. She glanced toward the doorway where the guards were speaking into their radios. The needle sealed away the hunt for the fake nurse already underway. Then she looked back at Jalen, and for the first time since that night, she didn't see just a boy lying in a hospital bed. She saw someone ready to fight back, not with violence, but with the one thing their enemies feared most: the truth. The warehouse sat on the edge of Ridgewood's industrial strip, its corrugated metal walls glinting under the low afternoon sun. From a distance, it looked abandoned, but Alexis knew better. Places like this were never truly empty. She slipped inside through a side door, her footsteps muffled on the dusty concrete. In the far corner, a lone figure stood half in shadow, shifting his weight nervously. "Ethan Voss," she called quietly. He turned. Young, maybe late 20s, the kind of face that still had some honesty left in it, despite wearing the Ridgewood PD badge. His hand trembled slightly as he reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, battered USB drive. "This is Cohen's body cam footage," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Uncut. Time-stamped. It shows everything." Jalen, he wasn't a threat. They knew it. They set him up. Alexis stepped closer, her gaze locked on his. Why Ethan's jaw tightened. They needed a test case. Something they could spin into proof that Fortis's AI system could predict hostile behavior even before it happened. "Your son." His voice faltered. "Your son was their sacrifice." The words hung in the air like a blade. Alexis slipped the USB into her pocket, her expression unreadable. "I'll testify," Ethan added quickly, as if the promise might make the guilt in his eyes lighter. "Whatever it takes, I'm done covering for them." Before she could answer, the distant rumble of an engine broke the silence. Headlights swept through the grimy windows, a black SUV rolling slow along the outer fence. Alexis's pulse didn't spike. She'd been expecting company. "They followed you," she said flatly. Ethan looked toward the door, panic flashing. "What do we—" "Go!" She cut him off, already moving toward the opposite side of the warehouse. "Take the north exit. 2 blocks over, there's a laundromat. Mason will meet you there. Keep your head down. What about you?" She didn't answer, just gave him one sharp nod. Then she stepped into the open, her movements deliberate, letting the glint of the setting sun catch her face for the approaching SUV's dash camera. Outside, the black vehicle slowed to a crawl. A tinted window slid down just enough for the glimmer of a camera lens to catch her profile. She held it for 2 seconds, long enough before slipping into the alley, gone before the tires could squeal. Back inside the SUV, Clive Maddox leaned forward in his seat, replaying the live feed. The corner of his mouth curled into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he murmured to the driver, "looks like we finally know who we're dealing with." By the time Alexis reached her safe house, the USB was already uploading to an encrypted server. She pulled out her secure satellite phone, the kind that never touched public networks, and hit Mason's number. When he answered, she didn't waste words. "It's time. We hit Ridgewood PD head on." By the time the clock hit 1:13 a.m., Ridgewood PD was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when people think the night is theirs. But Alexis had no intention of knocking. The black SUVs rolled in from 3 different streets, headlights cut, engines purring low. On paper, she was leading an FBI-CIA joint task force with an emergency federal warrant. In reality, that warrant was written in digital ink only she and Mason knew existed. The clock was ticking, and waiting for official channels meant giving Fortis more time to bury the truth. At the curb, Alexis stepped out, her dark, tactical jacket catching a sliver of moonlight. She glanced at the team, 6 agents she trusted with her life, and gave a single nod. The first guard at the front gate barely had time to register the flashing badge before 2 agents disarmed and cuffed him in one smooth motion. The second guard went quietly, more stunned than scared. Within 90 seconds, the outer perimeter was theirs. Inside, the air was colder, heavy with recycled AC and the faint scent of burnt coffee from the night shift. They moved fast, cutting through dim hallways until they reached the server room, a reinforced door with a keypad lock. Mason stepped forward, placing a palm-sized device against the panel. 3 beeps, 1 soft click, and the lock gave way. But they weren't alone. From the far side of the hall, Sergeant Cohen appeared, his uniform rumpled eyes bloodshot. Two officers flanked him, hands twitching near their holsters. "What the hell is this?" he barked. "You can't just—" Alexis didn't raise her voice. "We can, and we are! Stand down, Sergeant!" Cohen's jaw clenched. "You think you can walk in here like he never finished?" In a blur, two agents stepped in, disarming one officer while the other was shoved back against the wall. Cohen tried to push past, but Mason was there twisting his arm until the man dropped to his knees. The whole thing was over in seconds. Inside the server room, the hum of machines filled the space like an unbroken drumbeat. Alexis plugged in a portable extraction unit, the kind that could pull terabytes in minutes. Screens lit up with streams of data surveillance logs, dispatch transcripts. And then, there it was. An audio file date-stamped just hours before the shooting. She clicked play. Winslow's voice steady and calculated. "This one's perfect. Public won't question it." Clive Maddox, colder. "We frame it right, the AI gets greenlit nationwide. And if the kid's deaf? Even better. Less chance of talking back." The words sank in like a lead weight. There was no more doubt. This wasn't negligence. It was design. Alexis saved the files, layering encryption as she went. Outside, an agent signaled the 2-minute mark. They'd gotten what they came for. Now came the hard part, leaving before the hornet's nest woke up. The extraction was surgical. Within moments, they were back in the SUVs, the sealed evidence case sitting on Alexis's lap like a live grenade. She didn't look back as the station faded into the distance. By the time the first alarm blared through Ridgewood PD, the task force was already halfway across town. The files were uploaded to a federal evidence vault locked under a code that only Alexis knew. The hunt was no longer one-sided. By sunrise, Ridgewood wasn't the same town it had been the night before. Nearly 2,000 people filled the main square shoulder to shoulder, their voices, a low, restless current that could swell into a storm at any second. Some held hand-painted signs with Jalen's name in bold letters. Others carried nothing but the weight of their own anger. News crews lined the sidewalks, camera lenses glinting in the pale morning light. And then Alexis stepped onto the small stage in front of City Hall. She didn't have a teleprompter, a prepared speech, or even a script. She had only her voice, and for the first time in days, she didn't hide it. "My name is Alexis Carter," she began, steady but clear. "I am the mother of Jalen Carter. My son is lying in a hospital bed because men in uniform decided his life was a tool for their politics, their money, and their lies." The square fell silent, every ear catching on her words. They wanted to erase him. They wanted to silence the voice they thought he didn't have. But Jalen speaks in ways they will never understand. And I will fight for him with every breath I have left. Not with violence, but with the truth they're so afraid of. A cheer rippled through the crowd, swelling into a roar. It was the kind of sound that rattled windows. But in the middle of that swell, Maya's voice crackled through Alexis's earpiece. "Lex, we've got a problem. The original body cam file, the one on the USB Fortis, is moving to destroy it. Now. It's in their secure data warehouse." Alexis didn't flinch. She simply stepped back from the mic, handed it to a rally organizer, and disappeared into the press of people. By the time she reached the edge of the square, Ethan was waiting in an unmarked sedan, engine running. His jaw was tight. "You know their security," he said. "We get caught in there, they won't bother with arresting us." Then Alexis replied, sliding into the passenger seat, "We just won't get caught." The Fortis data facility loomed on the outskirts of town, a squat, windowless structure with security fencing and motion-triggered floodlights that swept across the gravel lot like restless eyes. They went in through the side loading dock, Ethan's stolen keycard, granting them a 30-second window before alarms recalibrated. Inside, the air was cold and sterile. Rows of server towers stretched into the dark like silent sentinels. Somewhere in that maze was the master terminal, holding the unaltered body cam file, the one piece of evidence no one could dispute. Ethan moved ahead, his flashlight beam cutting narrow slices through the dark. 2 minutes, he murmured. They reached the terminal, and Alexis connected her encrypted drive. The progress bar crawled 20%, 43%, 67%. Then a dull thunk echoed from the far aisle. Footsteps, 2 of them. Ethan tensed. "We've got company." "Keep it running," Alexis whispered, slipping into the shadows. She moved along the racks, catching a glimpse of 2 Fortis guards, both armed, both heading straight for Ethan's position. Timing was everything. She waited until they crossed into the narrow lane, then stepped out, one hand raised. "Looking for me?" They never reached Ethan. A flash of movement, a twist of momentum, and Alexis had both men on the floor, wind knocked clean out of them. By the time they could even shout, the transfer hit 100%. "Got it," Ethan hissed. They were out the same way they came in, slipping into the pre-dawn gray, without a single alarm blaring behind them. The drive never left Alexis's hands until it was placed directly into a sealed evidence case at the Department of Justice. She watched as it was logged, barcoded, and locked away in a federal vault. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to exhale. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was just the part where the people who thought they couldn't be touched started to realize they could. The courthouse steps were swarming that morning. Reporters, protesters, and onlookers crowded the marble entrance, their voices blending into a restless hum. But inside, it was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your skin. Cohen and Winslow were let in first, their wrists cuffed, their uniforms, stripped of any badge or honor. Cohen's eyes flickered around the room until they landed on the front row, where Jalen sat. Jalen didn't blink. He didn't smile. He simply raised his hand fingers, moving in precise, deliberate signs. "I see you." Cohen looked away. When Alexis took the stand, the air shifted. She wasn't just a mother now. She was the voice that had carried a story the whole town tried to bury. "They wanted my son broken," she told the court, her voice steady. "Not because of who he is, but because of what he represents, the truth. They thought they could turn his pain into a test case for their own agenda. But truth has a way of finding the light, if you fight hard enough to hold it there." She detailed the conspiracy, how Fortis and Ridgewood PD had staged the shooting, how data had been altered, and how the body cam footage proved every lie. Every point was backed by evidence, and when Ethan Voss took the stand, he confirmed it all. His testimony was clear, unshakable. You could almost feel the verdict sealing itself. The only person missing was Clive. Rumor had it he'd left the country 3 days earlier, slipping out through some back channel before charges could reach him. Some said he was hiding in Europe. Others thought he'd gone somewhere no one could find him. Either way, his absence spoke louder than his presence ever could. Weeks later, when the trial was over and justice had its moment, the community gathered for something different. It wasn't about anger or protest this time. It was about memory. A small stage stood in the center of the park, surrounded by candles and photographs. Jalen stepped up, his hands trembling just slightly as he faced the crowd. He signed slowly, each movement deliberate. "I remember the silence," Maya translated, standing beside him. "And today, I break it." The words seemed to hang in the air before the applause began, not loud, not chaotic, but steady, like the heartbeat of something new. In the weeks that followed, Jalen's sketchbook became more than paper and ink. On its last page, he'd drawn a city Ridgewood, but not as it was. In his version, children played in the streets, officers laughed alongside them, and the walls between them were gone. That drawing spread online, printed on posters, painted on walls. It became a symbol, a reminder of what the fight had been for. Then came the Thompson signal. Named after Alexis's maiden name, it wasn't just a platform, it was a movement, a space where voices like Jalen's, long silenced, could be heard without distortion. In its first week, It reached 1 million followers. On the site's homepage, just below the logo, was a single line in bold: "The silence ends here." And if you were there, if you had seen everything from the first moment to the last, you'd know it wasn't just a slogan. It was a promise. What happened in this story isn't just about one courtroom, one family, or one town. It's about the power of truth, the courage to speak when silence feels safer, and the hope that justice is still worth fighting for. If this story moved you, I'd love for you to hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Mr. Max